Fuck, let's hope I have enough recording data left for this. We're an hour in, or about 57 minutes into this article. Matthew Iglesias, again to recap, Vox writer, arguing that Daenerys Targaryen is not insane, nor evil, nor mad, that she had perfect tactical, clear, logical, tactical, rational reasons to butcher hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. Spoiler alert, no, she didn't. And that he doesn't even think Aerys II, the Mad King, her father, was insane at all. Spoiler alert, yes, he fucking was. Objectively, factually, this is not up for debate. And that he thinks that the council that formed to elect the king and their first elected choice, Bran, all of which could not possibly be anything more than worse than what Daenerys would have been, who would have been a butcherous, violent, paranoid queen who would kill civilians and lords, allies and enemies alike. He doesn't understand that that was not only logically what you would presume her actions would tell you what she would do in the future. It was the intention of the writers of the show, explicitly their intention to show the viewer that she had turned just as crazy, just as paranoid, just as butcherous and untrustworthy as her father. Everything that this author is saying is objectively, factually, inarguably false and wrong. And we're not done showing that yet. Next paragraph. Elective monarchy doesn't work. Yes, it does. It might work less good than a pure dictatorial hereditary monarchy. It might work less good than a democracy or a representative republic. But you have no reason to say it doesn't work. You have not defined work. You've not defined how it would not work. And I guarantee you if I read this upcoming paragraph, he won't. Matthew continues. Many countries over the years have walked the path from hereditary dictatorship to constitutional monarchy. It starts with establishing a popular elective assembly, the House of Commons. In the UK, it's actually the House of Lords, you jackass. And proceeds over time by both broadening voting rights and expanding the power of that assembly. What you don't see happening is countries following a path whereby the hereditary monarch is replaced by an elected one, and that evolves into democracy. Why not? Just because I don't even know if that's true, that it's never happened. And technically, an elected leader is not even considered a monarch anymore. Monarch is necessarily a hereditary position. What you're describing is a paramount or a chieftain or a president or a prime minister. Even if the public doesn't vote for your prime minister, the fact that a council who represents the kingdoms or fiefdoms or territories in which the small folk reside and pay up to said lord, the fact that a council of lords elects a governor actually doesn't mean he's not a monarch. He's an elected prime minister or whatever title you prefer. Even if you prefer the title of monarch, it's still not the same thing. Which is not to say that elective monarchies are unheard of in history. What happens instead is that they collapse. So do monarchies, and guess what? So do representative democracies, like Rome. They collapse too. Sometimes they collapse after getting a dictator, sometimes they collapse from invasion, sometimes they collapse culturally or economically. It doesn't necessarily follow. Just because it happens to follow doesn't mean it necessarily follows. This asshole doesn't even logic. In many cases, like the Holy Roman Empire, wow, it's like he knows exactly what I'm going to say, and yet he's wrong about what I'm going to say. It's like he had a conversation with a person who wasn't a batshit insane fucking retard, who told him he was wrong, and went, nah, I'm right, and watch, I'm going to put all your points in there, and then I'm going to totally deconstruct them, and I'm going to fucking own you so hard. And he just fails. He fails so miserably, it's pathetic. In many cases, like the Holy Roman Empire, the nature of the collapse is that one monarch uses his authority to ensure the election of his son, and then, after a few rounds of this, the elected monarchy becomes a dynastic one. Then how did it collapse? It just changed back into a dynastic one. And dynasties don't necessarily collapse. Again, this word necessarily is important because this guy says this follows from this, and he implies necessity. It's not there. It's not demonstrated. It doesn't follow. He has the same complete hole in his brain where logical arguments are made as the writers of this fucking show. No wonder he thinks the show made sense up until his favorite waifu did something he didn't like. Or actually worse, I'm sorry, I was describing a rational fan of this show, or a semi-rational fan of this show. No, he thinks everything his waifu did was fine. Wow. I forgot. He's more insane than insane. He's worse than any common stand in the show. This is the stupidest viewer of this show I've ever seen, and I'm not even 100% sure this guy does watch this show. To avoid the possibility of an elective monarchy becoming a dynastic monarchy in Game of Thrones, the assembled lords of Winterfell select the disabled Bran, who Sansa assures us is impotent. That was also a very stupid thing that the show did. It was merely something that Tyrion said to reassure these people. He's not going to be interested in dynasties because he is infertile or whatever, or sterile, or can't get it up because he's crippled. Whichever the case, it doesn't matter, because if there's one thing this author is implying that is true, is whoever's elected next may not have that. Merely it was Tyrion trying to reassure everybody that this was the right choice to make in the moment, hastily, like everything in this goddamn season was hasty, and said, look, this guy doesn't have any staked interest, he's not interested in glory, he's not interested in wealth or riches, he's detached from the world, he can't have kids, he's the best transitory monarch we have, and he's not necessarily better than anybody else, he's not necessarily better than a dynasty or a monarch, he's not necessarily better than Jon Snow, who there was no fucking reason for him to be banished at all, because Grey Worm and the Dothraki did not remain in the Seven Kingdoms to enforce any kind of punishment that they would put on Jon Snow. Jon Snow could have gone where he pleased. He could have retired to Winterfell. He could have fucking done anything. Nothing on the show made any sense, but I don't want to talk too much about the show because we're talking about Matthew Iglesias, this stupid, fucking, minuscule pea-brained, fucking myopic retard. Where were we? So, Bran, of course, is not going to be a dynastic dictator because he's impotent. This puts us in the case of a state like the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which really did have openly contested elections for its kingship, meaning that it wasn't really a king. The problem with this approach is that each moment of succession becomes a crisis, with the various major stakeholders clashing for office. Halina Lersky, author of the Historical Dictionary of Poland, how far off topic are we going to get, Matthew, tells us that these elections generated political conflicts in the 17th century and foreign intervention in the 18th century. They became a symbol of anarchy and corruption. Boy. The kingship of Robert, the queenship of Cersei, before that, the kingship of Aerys, all of these generated controversy. Every single time in the extensive history of the Targaryens, which I've read at least half of because I have the first volume of their history, do you know how many times a fucking a Targaryen did not produce a male heir and a cousin or somebody from some other line that had some, was a cousin or a fucking son of a daughter of a yada yada yada, stuff got removed from a direct hereditary multiple times. It happens every single time a king does not sire a direct male heir. And every time it has happened, a fucking giant war started. The Dance of Dragons that killed almost every fucking dragon in Westeros, killed so many nobles, burned so many fucking people, saw the rise of crazy commoner fucking dragon riders, and the fucking horrible murder. And I told you guys multiple times in another Game of Thrones video that just about every time two dragons fought, somebody died. One of the dragons got maimed for life, the other one fucking died, and usually the guy who won was burned to shit, and it was horrible, and all this shit happened from the same thing. You say elected monarchies cause strife and war and blah, 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 blah. Guess what? Dynastic monarchies cause strife and war and blah, 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 blah. If here, you want to do a fucking history lesson? Here, folks, let's talk about, I'm going to do this for 10 minutes to fill time because we're almost over, and this is actually very interesting, folks. Let's talk about the election of President Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Abraham Lincoln was elected in a very close three-way vote. Now, I don't remember off the top of my head, and any historians are free to correct me, but Lincoln won the popular vote in this three-way election with less than 40% of the vote, meaning that he had just the biggest chunk of the roughly thirds. And the Southern sympathetic candidate got a certain amount, and a more neutral kind of candidate between the two got almost as many votes. So roughly 60% of the country did not vote for Lincoln, did not want Lincoln. And guess what? The other thing, by the way, is secession was legal under the Constitution of the United States. Because one thing that modern people don't know is that the United States is now far more federal and considered a whole body than it has ever been, even in the recent past. The United States is a federation of independent, semi-autonomous and sovereign states. Like the state of Florida has a governor and has unique laws, and that through some questionable Supreme Court decisions, blah, 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 there's a federal supremacy clause that didn't used to exist. The Founding Fathers actually intended state supremacy over federal, and the federal people are mostly supposed to build roads, have a mail system, and raise armies, and virtually nothing else. The power that the federal government has at this point in history would horrify the Founding Fathers, and one of the men partially responsible for this fucking travesty is Abraham Lincoln, whose murderer shouted in Latin after shooting Lincoln in the back of the head, "Sic semper tyrannis," which means death to tyrants. And quite arguably, not necessarily, but quite arguably, Lincoln was a tyrant who forced states that had the legal right to secede to come back under federal control, a federal control that the Founding Fathers actually never intended. And doesn't that blow everybody's fucking mind that all of us actually have been standing for a tyrant much like this jackass is standing for Daenerys? Now, of course, slavery is wrong, don't get me wrong and all that shit. However, this war was not even partially yes, but not particularly fought over slavery. But not a lot of people know that. Our American school systems are garbage. Look into it. Anyway, the point is, I can also tell you how even elected democracies can lead to horrible strife. The bloodiest war America, a representative democracy or representative republic that's partially democratic. We're technically not a democracy. It's technical, whatever. Anyway, the point is, even under our supposedly optimal and righteous system, horrific bloodshed and strife can pursue or come directly from our system. Our system is not necessarily better than theirs. It does not prevent the horrors that this asshole is describing. The horrors this asshole is describing happens in inherited dynasties. It happens in elected monarchies or lordship elected monarchies, and it happens in civilian elected presidencies. Okay? Horrible, bloody warfare, great hatred, strife, bloodshed, breakups of kingdoms, okay? These can happen in any system. The fact that this guy thinks it necessarily doesn't in ours when it factually has and probably will happen again in the future and has happened, and what he thinks the show's solution is, which is not even necessarily a solution. It's just the thing that happens at the end, and I don't think it makes any sense. It's not really relevant to any of the plot. I don't care who wins, since the people who are really vying for the throne are all dead or banished. And they just elect some guy. I don't care. The conflict is over. It doesn't matter to me anymore because all the characters that matter to me are gone. You understand? And I think a lot of the audience agrees with me. Okay. So these elected monarchies, so-called, were abolished in 1791. We're back to talking about Poland and Lithuania, blah, blah, blah. Imagine Sir Braun's successor squandering the agricultural wealth of the Reach. Give me a second. I need to look at something. Yeah, no, that is the Reach. Wait, is it? Hold on, let me look at this fucking map. I gotta climb up on my gay bed. Don't look at my ass. No, that is the Reach. For some reason, I didn't think Highgarden was in the Reach. Because every time they said, we will give Braun Highgarden, what they should have been saying technically is we give Braun the Reach. 1 bonus point to Matthew for getting something right that the show got wrong. Let's continue. Imagine Sir Braun's successor squandering the agricultural wealth of the Reach on bribing other nobles to elect him king, while the Iron Bake makes under-the-table financial commitments to supporters of a rival faction that will promise to pay off the crown's long-delinquent debts. Wait, look at this guy didn't even proofread his work. That's why I just stuttered. What it says is, Iron Bake makes under-the-table financial commitments to the supporters of a rival faction that will promise to pay off the crown's long-delinquent deaths, like people dying. What he means is debts, like money that they're owed. Dumb ass. Matthew, proofread your fucking articles. Thank you. The elective monarchy is a recipe not only for weak governance while the monarch is on the throne, but for rounds of civil war, foreign intervention, and possible succession in the period immediately before and after the monarch's death. Game of Thrones' New World Order is going to lead, in the long term, to much more killing than a proper Targaryen restoration featuring a healthy dose of law and order and centralized control. Not necessarily, Matthew. Maybe fucking not. How many times do I have to say this, you fucking jackass? The idea of government by fire and blood cuts against our modern sensibilities, and rightly so, but no option of a modern constitutional regime was on the table at any point during the series, and wouldn't have been if your waifu Daenerys had won the Game of Thrones. She would have been, like Bran, presumably, and like Jaehaerys the Conciliator before her, a beneficent fucking dictator, a monarch. The monarch! Are you fucking shitting me, you jackass? But no option of a modern constitutional regime was on the table at any point during the series, and that's not what the Great Council settled on. Obviously. Have you looked at the fucking setting? Medieval fiefdoms. Dumbass. It would have been ludicrous to them. They wouldn't have understood the concept, and they would have been horrified by it. The small folk can't even read. The small folk don't have televisions and radios. They don't see their leaders hardly ever. Dumbass. They see the taxman. They see the soldiery. They see the king once every 8 to fucking 15 years whenever he decides to go on a great big ride around the kingdom. Otherwise, they never fucking see him. Of course, they could not be expected to elect the king that they will never see, who will sit on a throne they will never see, in a city they will never fucking go to. They don't have cars or planes or televisions or newspapers or radio or telegraph wire or the internet, you fucking retard. Are you fucking kidding me? It wouldn't even have been necessarily a good idea for them to make decisions. We could play hypotheticals all day. You could say, oh, we just hand out leaflets to everybody who says this king thinks this shit. What if people tamper with the leaflets? What if there's great big election fraud? We could jerk off all day with hypotheticals, fucker. None of this shit necessarily follows. All of it is not true. It is only, depending on what does or does not happen further in the plot that we'll never fucking see, it is either permitted or it is not, but nothing is true. Nothing necessarily happens unless it is fucking permitted. How many times do I have to fucking say this? This guy is making me read like an autist. Like, fuck off. We're almost done. A couple more sentences. Of the available options, Daenerys' plan to break the wheel was the best one, except for she clearly demonstrated to us, the writers intended, and poorly they tried to convey to us, that Daenerys could not break the wheel, because Daenerys would just be a worse wheel than the one there already was, because she will, on a whim, for no reason at all, kill hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children. And the penultimate episode of this series had a fucking half-hour sequence where all we saw her was killing and burning and exploding and destroying. And we saw children, men, women, soldiers, allied troops all fucking die. Because she's crazy, Matthew. Daenerys' plan was the best one. Yes, the butcher who could and would kill fucking everybody, who had the fucking dragon, and the strongest standing army left after the horrific wars of Westeros. No one would be able to stop her. And what we have been shown is her choices make no sense. She's crazy. She's crazy because her choices make no sense, and what she has been choosing of late is unnecessarily killing people. And she started by killing people like the Tarleys that she did not have to kill, but chose to kill for a logical reason. They were lords who would have lived if they bent the knee and insisted that they would resist her to their dying breath, and if she wanted them to stop resisting, she had to kill them. They offered her no choice. Now, she could have maybe banished them, maybe imprisoned them, maybe tortured them until they changed their mind, or she could make a very clear example of them in front of lots of fucking people, in front of all their bannermen who did kneel, in front of all of the soldiery who were raised from small folk, that she was shown. If you kneel to me, I will raise you like Aegon the Conqueror, my ancestor before me. If you kneel, I will raise you as my bannerman. If you resist, you will burn. This makes perfect logical sense. And that's what she was doing until she decided to kill innocent civilians who were in no way resisting her at all. Instead, Matthew, you fucking idiot. So Daenerys' plan to break the wheel was the best one, and the clique of aristocrats that overthrew her has done nothing but condemn Westeros to anarchy and misgovernment. Not necessarily. Just like Daenerys, not necessarily, and even quite clearly, would have done worse. The entire reason why she was killed on the show is because she stopped being what you still think she is. I don't know why I'm holding up this plug. That looks weird. She stopped being what you thought she was. If Daenerys had not killed 100,000 people, if Jon here's what they should have done, what I thought they were going to do as I was watching the episode live. Ready? Cersei lets several hundred small folk into her castle. Eventually, she decides she has to shut the gate. The attack is coming. She shuts the gate. Cersei is now in a castle with several hundred innocents. If Daenerys had decided to burn that castle to ash with everyone in it, including Cersei and Qyburn and the Mountain, as well as several hundred small folk, in order to break the capital, that would have been horrible. Because hundreds of innocent people would have died, and maybe idiot Jon Snow would have chosen to kill her, because maybe they had a perfectly good plan to get Cersei out of there. Tyrion presumably had a plan to get Cersei out of there. Maybe Jon or anybody else would have had a plan to capture Cersei without burning the castle. Maybe they would have been horrified that Daenerys killed several hundred innocent people, but innocent people that she logically killed because they were directly in her way of immediately and swiftly killing the queen before the queen could escape, she would have had a logical reason to do a horrifying thing, and maybe somebody would have chosen to kill her over it because it was horrifying. You understand? That would have all been horrible, because if Daenerys had never said, "I will rule by fear," if Daenerys had never shown that she was paranoid, if Daenerys had never said repeatedly in rhetoric that she would probably kill tyrants in Dorne who were allied to her, and tyrants in Winterfell, which was allied to her and presumably going to marry into her family, and then kill everybody else, whoever would stand in her way. If she had said none of those things and just killed 100 people, and then somebody killed her because they're horrified at her killing 100 people, then this guy would have had an argument. But that didn't happen. That was a hypothetical that did not fucking happen. Something else happened that this guy cannot correctly identify because he's insane. 3 parts, almost 30 minutes each. Holy shit, I am blown away that I took this much time, that I didn't lose my voice talking and yelling this much. This is one of the worst articles about anything. This is one of the worst critiques of anything I've ever read. There's almost nothing. There was about 2 sentences in this entire article that we've been working on for 90 minutes that make any sense. It's not just that they were right. It's that they were a logical, coherent statement. This guy just slew a bunch of fucking random, stupid, retarded, immoral, evil, illogical, irrational, just factually incorrect, gobbledygook, fucking horseshit. This is the worst thing I've ever read. Matthew Iglesias, you are the dumbest person in human existence. You should make an avatar of yourself in Minecraft and explode it. And consider exploding a representation of yourself in other realms of virtual possibility. Like, anyway, no snitching, folks. This is the worst thing I've ever read. I was batshit furious reading it for the first time. The second time took none of the sting out. This is the worst thing in the fucking universe. And thank you for sharing in my fucking suffering. But yelling about fucking idiots that I will always and forever be in every way better than makes me feel pretty good at the end. After all, we can take a deep breath and just relish in the catharsis that we will never be as stupid as this man. Thanks, everybody.